Thousands of civilian deaths, a now regional conflict, and a regime change that has not happened. Is the US-Israeli war on Iran going to be the next geopolitical and humanitarian disaster? And where is the EU voice, if there is one? We will discuss all of this in a very special episode with our guest Paul Taylor. Check it out.
A regime that is prepared to kill thousands of its own people in order to survive is going to hang on as long as it can. I mean, more interceptor missiles were expended in the first 3 days of this war than in the entire 4 years so far of Russia's war against Ukraine. It's clear that Israel pulled the United States into this war. Putin is also a loser in this war, in the sense that once again, a major Russian partner and client has been attacked by the United States, and Russia's been able to do nothing about it. My little finger tells me that Cuba may be next. I could well see, if this war drags on, the European Union and the Gulf countries sort of getting together and saying, Mr. President, stop this war. Even if we don't go to the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz may come to us. Our security services are on heightened alert because of the risk of Iranian-inspired terrorist attacks in our cities and countries. War, you know how it starts, but you don't know how it ends.
Our guest, Paul Taylor, is one of the leading Iran experts, a journalist with over 40 years of frontline reporting. He covered live the Iranian Revolution in 1979 and interviewed Ayatollah Khomeini before he became Iran's supreme leader. Paul is today a central voice on the Middle East. His insights shed much-needed light on the reasons behind the current conflict and how it could unfold.
Here and welcome to Moving Europe.
Thank you for having me.
To go directly into the substance of things, several weeks have passed into the Iranian war now, and one question I think is the most important. Is the regime closer to fall than it was before?
Well, the regime obviously has been decapitated. They've killed the supreme leader and much of his family. His son has been elected successor, but we haven't yet seen him as of today, and we're not sure how alive he is. Only one statement has been issued in his name, but the regime still seems to be holding in the sense that orders are being passed down from a hierarchy to commanders in the field who are maintaining both fire against other countries in the Middle East, several times a day, and are maintaining public order, repression, if you like, are maintaining some public services, broadcasting. So, the backbone of the regime still seems to be there. And there really is, as far as I can see at this stage, no alternative. There's no organized opposition. The regime still has a monopoly of guns. So it has a monopoly of force. It showed that it was prepared to kill thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people in January when they went out to demonstrate over the cost of living. And that turned into demonstrations against the late supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. And so, a regime that is prepared to kill thousands of its own people in order to survive, is going to hang on as long as it can. And I don't see any real signs of it cracking. I don't see an organized opposition. I don't believe that the opponents outside who we see on American television have any really traction, organization in the country. And therefore, I don't see what's going to overthrow the regime at this stage.
How is possible it was not part of the political calculation on the US and Israeli side, that there was not a strong enough opposition to take power after the strikes?
I'm not sure what the US and the Israelis really calculated, or whether they calculated the same thing. The Israelis want to get rid of Iran as a threat to them for as long as they can. And they are quite happy to see Iran in chaos, Iran in civil war. They have been encouraging and arming and training the Kurds. They have been, they would like to see Iran fall apart, and they'd be quite happy for it to get messy. The Americans, I think, partly also because of their Gulf allies who are really unhappy about this war, the Americans want to see a stable Iran. They don't appear to care that much whether it's run by some version of the current leadership, providing they're prepared to be more accommodating towards America on 2 or 3 issues, the nuclear program, ballistic missiles, and support for proxies, what the Israelis and the Americans call terrorism in the Middle East. So they have somewhat different war aims. But I think that it's natural that anybody starting a war will call on the people of the country they're fighting against to rise up and overthrow, cast off the tyranny that they have endured for 46 years. But, that's really political rhetoric rather than a plan.
Yeah, and the reality is often different. And on the nuclear, one misconception I think that there is in media is that Iran was willing to make concession on the nuclear on the US. With the US in particular during negotiation, they were really in favor of making this concession. So why did the US attack?
Well, first of all, we don't know exactly what concessions the Iranians were prepared to make. They have been incredibly skillful in negotiating, in spinning out negotiations over decades. The European Union was very much involved. Javier Solana was the person who started negotiating with Iran, and that was like 23 years ago. Right? And those negotiations were spun out until eventually an agreement was reached. All the evidence is, including from the IAEA, that Iran was abiding by that original agreement until Donald Trump walked out. He said it wasn't good enough, that it wouldn't prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. We don't know what intelligence the United States or Israel may have or may have had about secret programs or whatever, but clearly what was visible to the IAEA looked like they were abiding by it. After the Americans walked out, then the Iranians gradually upped the pace of their enrichment, as we know, and they had some highly enriched uranium, and they were getting towards the nuclear threshold. Now, how close were they? We again, you pays your money and you takes your choice. Some people would say they were 6 months away, they were 3 months away. I've heard sort of Trump say 5 days or something, but I'm not sure why we should believe that any more than any of the other things he says. But clearly the Iranians were slowly approaching the threshold. Whether they had the intent to cross that threshold or whether they wanted to remain below it, but so that everybody knew that they could cross it very quickly if they were under threat. I think that the latter is more likely. The question is, can the Middle East live with that? Can the West live with that? And what do you do about it? Clearly, the Israelis felt that they couldn't live with it, and they were not willing to live with it. And therefore, they are the ones who really, I think, have been in the driving force. When the Iranians said death to America, people in the United States kind of pretty much shrugged for 40 years. It's not like everybody went around thinking, God, the Iranians are going to kill us. But in Israel, when the Iranians said death to Israel, people took it at face value. They say that's what they mean. And they've got proxies just across our borders who are willing to kill us, are willing to fire rockets at us, and to make us unsafe in our Jewish homeland. And so that's something that is quite a difference in perception between the Americans and the Israelis.
And if the threat is so much bigger for Israelis, do you think that then the reason for the strong involvement of the US is also the strong lobbying by Netanyahu and the Israeli government?
I think that to some extent it's clear that the Israel pulled the United States into this war. whether that was on the timing of it or on the, from the United States point of view, and it was made quite clear, I think, publicly by Secretary Rubio. They didn't want to be the first to commit an act of aggression against Iran, but if Israel committed an act of aggression against Iran and then Iran retaliated against Israel, well, then they would come in to defend Israel. Yeah. So it's kind of a second degree involvement. And it's slightly the same with the Europeans. The Europeans did not want to be dragged into Netanyahu and Trump's war. But when the Iranians started firing missiles and drones at countries with which individual European member states have defense agreements, well, then they had to abide by those. They had to respect those defense agreements and help those countries to intercept the missiles and so on. So far, the EU has been, and when I say the EU, I mean Europe, including the United Kingdom and non-EU countries, have been quite careful about not being involved in any offensive action, but they have clearly been involved in defensive action. And at some stage, if they get unlucky and their service people in the Middle East are killed, there will be domestic pressure saying it's not enough just to try and put up the butterfly net and catch the missiles as they're coming in. We should go and take out the sources of those missiles. And pretty soon then you're talking about offensive operations in Iran. That hasn't happened yet. A French soldier was killed in Erbil a couple of days ago. President Macron reacted to it very calmly, took it more as a tragedy, just one of those things that happens, rather than as a casus belli against France. But somebody could get unlucky in war. You know how it starts, but you don't know how it ends.
We saw already last year the attacks on the three biggest nuclear facilities, and yet when we look back to it now, at the time Trump claimed we destroyed all the nuclear potential, now it looks like it might have been a strategic failure, no?
Well, I don't know what the word obliterate means to you, but to me it doesn't suggest that Iran would be able to pick itself up and start again quite quickly. And again, as far as we know, the intelligence that has been made public does not suggest that Iran had restarted to reconstitute its nuclear program. Now, I'm not privy to any secret intelligence, but on the publicly available information, including from lots of people watching Iran, that there was no sign that they'd actually started to. The fact is, of course, that highly enriched uranium is still there in Iran, in some underground bunker, apparently under a mountain near Isfahan. Now, there's been rumors, again, in the media, in the US media, that maybe the United States would try to send special forces in to capture that enriched uranium and either somehow dilute it or actually take it out of the country. It would be a very, very difficult operation. But the thing is, you can't stop the Iranians from having the nuclear knowledge in their heads. You can assassinate their nuclear scientists, which the Israelis have been doing for years. But this is a highly developed country with nuclear scientists. They began a nuclear program under the late Shah. It's not like the mullahs were the people who launched a nuclear program. In fact, for the first 10 years of the revolution, the nuclear program went nowhere. They abandoned the program that the Shah had started. And they only started it up again sort of after the end of the Iran-Iraq War, or towards the end of the Iran-Iraq War.
Yeah, and in terms of the nuclear development now, after the US strikes and the decapitation strategy, if before Iran was preferring diplomacy over direct confrontation, now the speed of developing nuclear weapons in Iran will be faster.
Well, logically, I mean, when they look at North Korea and they see that President Trump holds summits with Kim Jong-un and he's, giving the guy respect and not going and bombing North Korea, they have to come to the conclusion that it's, for any regime, it's safer to have a bomb. They look around them. Iran lives in a nuclear armed neighborhood. You know, on the one side of them, they have Pakistan, which is nuclear armed. They have India, which is nuclear armed. To the north of them, they have Russia, which is nuclear armed. And to the west of them, of course, they have the one Middle Eastern country which we think we know has nuclear weapons, and that's Israel. So, you know, I remember many people over the years in Tehran saying to me, in the foreign ministry and elsewhere, why should we be the suckers? Why should we be the only people in the Middle East that don't have the right to have a nuclear bomb? And that was people who were who at the same time say, of course, we don't intend to actually have a nuclear bomb. So there was a degree of hypocrisy about it.
Yeah, but it would also be a possibly stabilizing factor for the Middle East if Iran would have a nuclear weapon. What do you think?
Well, I think it would obviously depend what the regime in Iran was. I don't think there are many people who would think that the Ayatollahs with nuclear weapons would be a stabilizing factor. You know, I mean, the fact is that all their other neighbors who don't yet have nuclear weapons or who rely on the protection of the United States or others, such as Turkey, Saudi Arabia, would want to go nuclear. Saddam Hussein had started a nuclear program. You know, so it's clear that Iran getting a nuclear weapon, at least under this regime, and I you know, would be destabilizing rather than stabilizing. But the fact that it doesn't have one and is trying to get one is also destabilizing.
I wanted to come back to something you said before on how possibly also European countries could be sucked into this war. You mentioned the defense agreements with many countries. How about economic interests especially with the Strait of Hormuz? Do you see this as also a possible trigger?
I mean, obviously the European Union has two interests. One, it gets about 20% of its oil and gas through the Strait of Hormuz. We've seen with the crisis with Russia that the EU is capable of pivoting, and no doubt it will be able to find alternative sources, but the prices will go up if that oil and gas is taken off the world market for a sustained period. So that will have a knock-on impact on the cost of living, which will create political instability. You know, the price of eggs, as they say in America, right? So that's one factor. The other thing is we do a lot of business with the Gulf countries, both defense business and commercial business. We have the EU has in fact developed, and that's one of the things where I think one can praise the sort of long-term approach of European diplomacy. Has developed a sustained relationship with the Gulf countries, which has come in useful in this crisis. I think that could be developed further because they are clearly all disenchanted with the United States and the way the United States has treated their interests in this conflict. And so I could well see, if this war drags on, the European Union and the Gulf countries sort of getting together, and whether in physically or by video conference, taking a posse to the White House, as they did with President Zelensky last summer, when it looked like Trump was about to sell him down the river to the Russians, and saying, Mr. President, stop this war. And that, so I think that, you know, the European Union, as often, it's a bit of a diesel engine, isn't it? It's slow to start. It makes a lot of rather ugly noise at the beginning, but when it gets motoring, you know, it's quite powerful. And I think in this crisis too, you know, you saw the typical European response, uncoordinated, with people saying things that contradicted each other. The Spanish saying, stop this illegal war. The others saying, you know, legal, illegal, let's be real. Even among the EU institutions, you have a debate between, if you can call it a debate, divergences between President von der Leyen saying, you know, we can't be the last custodians of the corpse of international law, and President Costa saying, you know, we must hold and stand by our principles of international law. Well, you know, which is it? And the answer, of course, is it's a very difficult question for the European Union, because the European Union is a law-based institution. It's a community of law. Everything's based on treaties that are enforceable with courts and a commission and so on. And the international community doesn't work like that. There was a period when the European Union felt, I think, after the end of the Cold War and up to about 2007-8, when the European Union really felt on a roll that, the world was going in our direction, and the world was going to be a more rules-based governance, whether on climate, on environment, on conflict resolution, and so on. That world didn't come to pass, and in fact, a lot of countries didn't want that world because they thought it was imperialist anyway. I think of major countries like India, China, but also it turns out that our closest ally, which was the co-creator of the international rules-based order, as we like to call it, has also walked out saying, "Forget about it. That was yesterday."
But apart from the question of committing to the international rules-based order, now in the last days, some governments, also European governments, for instance, Italy, had discussed about, to which degree to intervene to secure the Strait of Hormuz or not intervene. Yeah. And one argument which was often raised was, let's not go too much into this because we are risking repercussions also in the form of terroristic attacks at home. How likely do you see this to happen?
I mean, look, this is one of the consequences of this war. Even if we don't go to the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz may come to us, because among the weapons, the levers that the Iranian regime can pull are, we believe, sleeper cells and sympathizer groups in Europe, in Latin America, and so on. And therefore, our security services are on heightened alert because of the risk of Iranian-inspired terrorist attacks in our cities and countries. This is partly, because as far as they're concerned, it's the West that's attacking them. I don't know that Iranians make necessarily the fine distinctions between, Mrs. Maloney's position, Mr. Starmer's position, Mr. Macron's position, and so on. To them, it's the West. It's the great Satan and the great Satan's followers.
Yeah, and this war is impacting from a security perspective European citizens as well in their daily lives, but it's also impacting from an economic perspective your families and households. There, the European Union, with one voice, could have avoided this to happen, or it was just impossible?
No, I don't think the European Union could have prevented Israel and the United States from attacking Iran if they had decided to do so. And the question is, how does the European Union try to have some leverage, some influence, to get the conflict to stop before the situation worsens, to get the Strait of Hormuz reopened, to recreate some stability for the Gulf countries, so that, everything. We have companies there, we have citizens who work there, we have tourists there. The Gulf region has been a hub for air travel, which it can't currently be. I know lots of people who, whose vacations have been messed up by the fact that they can't take Emirates to Dubai and then on to somewhere in the Far East. I hope they all come to Provence, but not all at once, please. So, what can we do about it? I think we need to work on President Trump, both by denying him some of the assistance that he demands, but also in giving him the carrot of saying, but if you stop, we are prepared to do this or that. And to do so in partnership with Gulf Arab countries, so that there is some sign that it's not just the European special pleading, but it's a lot of America's allies.
What can we offer to the US to make
the
move?
I say we can offer post-conflict minesweeping, escorting convoys, monitoring of a ceasefire. We can offer, a greater role in helping to police the sea routes. I mean, we already have a mission in the Red Sea, but it's a small mission. And we have a mission off the Horn of Africa. But clearly, these are sea routes that are really important trade routes for the European Union. If shipping can't sail to and through the Suez Canal, it's Europe that gets hit, not the United States.
And talking about who's benefiting from this war, one country is clearly Russia, and the US now gave licenses again to purchase Russian oil.
Yeah.
So how impactful the Iranian war will be for Russian revenue?
Well, I mean, I think that so far it's been a terrible war for Ukraine because in several ways. First of all, Russia gets more revenue from its oil, and it gets sort of an American pass to sell more of its oil. Plus, the Ukraine watches, I mean, more interceptor missiles were expended in the first 3 days of this war than in the entire 4 years so far of Russia's war against Ukraine. So, if the United States wants to protect allies, it's got the missiles and so on. And clearly, under Trump, it had no intention of sending those missiles to Ukraine. And so Ukraine, I think, in that way is a big loser. And also, the world's eyeballs are on the Middle East at the moment and not on Ukraine. You open any web news page and where you have to look down the bottom of the page to find Ukraine at all.
What really strikes me is that while Russian intelligence services are helping Iranians to strike the US bases and the US military on the ground, the Trump administration still is granting licenses to purchase Russian oil again. What sense do you make out of it?
I'm not sure that we know for a secure fact that the Russians are targeting information to the Iranians. There were one or two reports, sourced to unnamed U.S. officials in some U.S. media about that. But I wouldn't say that I know that as a fact. But it's possible that Russia was helping Iran. After all, Iran has helped Russia massively. The Shahed drones, which are causing such damage and destruction in Ukraine, came from Iran, and now Russia is able to make them on its own. There's a sense in which Putin is also a loser in this war, in the sense that once again, a major Russian partner and client has been attacked by the United States or has seen its regime come under a threat, and Russia's been able to do nothing about it, just as with the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, just as with the kidnapping by the United States of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela. And, my little finger tells me that Cuba may be next. And once again, what will Russia do, if anything, to support Cuba? Incidentally, what's the European Union doing to support Cuba, which is facing a massive humanitarian crisis since the United States forced Venezuela to stop oil supplies to Cuba? Where's Europe when Cuba's lights went out? Are we just bystanders, or are we going to do something to help them?
And I think that's also the central question about Europe's capacity to act as a credible global power. We see that compared to other big powers, in the end, often we seem quite harmless.
Well, we're not a power. We are a community of nation states with some federal institutions, but we're not a federal state, and we're not a power. Our own member states do not entirely trust each other, don't all share the same views, the same political sensitivities. They have different histories. Germany has a particular feels a particular historical responsibility towards Israel, which makes any criticism of Israeli action very difficult in the European Union. other countries, had historic ties to Serbia, while others had ties to Croatia, and so on. So when these conflicts arise, often European knees do not spontaneously jerk in the same direction. And trying to bring some sort of common position out of that starting point is a difficult task for the European Union, and particularly difficult where the apparatus to do so is rather imperfect, and where you have the Commission President trying to run her own foreign policy, whereas the treaties say that it's the High Representative who's supposed to be representing the European view, and the President of the European Council at his level. So, we're not doing ourselves any favors.
Do you think we can become a global power without becoming more federal?
Since I don't think we're going to become much more federal, we may become, we become federal through crisis. So often European solutions are found, which then create new areas of collective European community action. But, we will remain substantially intergovernmental on foreign policy and defense, in my judgment. And that will continue to be a limit. But, we can do more, we can do better. We're on the way to doing better in terms of defense procurement, defense spending, and so on. But it will take time. It will take 5 to 10 years for us to really have a more credible capability, at least to try and deter Russia at a conventional level on our own.
But I think it's crazy that Europe would like to intervene and may not have the capacity, and then there are other powers like China, for instance, who clearly would have the capacity to intervene, who decides to stay very much out of it. What do you make of that behavior?
I think that China is very cautious. Naturally, it takes a very, very, very long time view of things, and it sees the United States credibility internationally self-destructing. And there's an old saying that says, never stop your opponent from doing something stupid. Don't try and distract from what they're doing. So obviously, although China gets a lot of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz, they're not going to go and bail out Donald Trump's war. They would like to see the war end in a way that is embarrassing or unsuccessful for the United States. I don't think they care enormously about how it ends for Israel. And they would like to see countries in the global south, as it's now called, rally around China as this sort of calm, reliable, dependable partner that doesn't go starting wars and doesn't think that everything can be solved with a sledgehammer.
From an international law perspective, after the kidnapping of Maduro, the intervention on Iran, how the West could look credible if then China in the future invades Taiwan in putting sanctions?
I think from an international law perspective, we probably wouldn't have a leg to stand on, but it wouldn't stop us standing on that leg. The thing is, ultimately what's stopping China from trying to capture Taiwan militarily is not international law. It is deterrence. It is the military capability of Taiwan itself, and the fact that China cannot be certain that the United States and other powers, including Japan, might not come to Taiwan's assistance. And that's what deterrence is about. It's not about international law.
What I'm saying is that, considering deterrence, if the United States do strikes in Iran as they did in Iraq, under the fact that these countries were developing nuclear programs, why then can this country feel safe in not developing nuclear?
That's a legitimate question. I think ultimately, again, the states that really feel that they have to go nuclear historically have gone nuclear. Israel, India, Pakistan, and other states have been willing to renounced nuclear weapons because they felt that their security was provided by the United States or by Russia or by somebody else, or that they felt that they were in a sufficiently strong position that they didn't need a nuclear umbrella. President Macron said a couple of weeks ago that the next 50 years are going to be nuclear.
Yeah.
It's clear that there will be not fewer nuclear powers, but probably more nuclear powers. I don't know who's next on the list. I haven't really thought about that. But there are a lot of countries which could go nuclear if they felt threatened quite quickly, including European countries, probably Sweden, probably Poland, Brazil, and who knows when circumstances may arise when one of those countries no longer feels it can rely on whatever protection it has before, or that feels that its status requires it to have nuclear weapons.
Yeah. And from a political and foreign policy perspective, the US administration are now like 30 years of intervention in the Middle East, and the concrete outcome politically on the ground has never been the expected one. So why is there still in the Republican base an idea and an understanding that this intervention could still work?
Well, let's start by saying that this intervention in Iran seems to be pretty unpopular in the United States, right? There hasn't been much rallying around the US flag, not even in the Republican Party. Secondly, interventionism is not particularly a preserve of the Republican Party. You have interventionists in both parties. For sure, you had the sort of John McCain school of liberal interventionism, right? In the Republicans, but Hillary Clinton and others also interventionists, and you have also I'm not sure if I'd use the word isolationists, but prioritizers in both camps as well. So it's not as simple as that, and we've just seen a MAGA official resigning as head of counterterrorism intelligence in the United States in opposition to the rationale for this war. So it's not unanimous, but I think that there is still an important part of the United States security establishment which feels that the United States has a responsibility and a role in upholding global security as they see it, and that this involves commitments to allies, including European allies, but also Israel, Gulf allies, and that this from time to time requires military action. The fact that those military actions don't always have the consequences that were hoped for, I think that's partly due to the way they've been conducted, but it's also, war is a messy thing and it leaves a terrible chaos.
What I wanted also to say is that military action can be effective as well if there is a planning, because from my impression in their recent intervention through history in Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, there was not so much planning on, after the intervention was after, how we ensure stability.
Yeah, I think this is an administration, to be honest, that doesn't seem to do much planning, and a president who doesn't seem to do much planning. I think that's the true truth. But I'm sure that there are people that have thought this through in Israel. But of course, then you've got to look at people's short-term political interests as well. Who knows what place the Epstein scandal played in the calculations of Donald Trump as to whether, he needed a war to distract attention from embarrassing stuff at home. Yeah. But if that was his calculation, it may have pushed Epstein out of the headlines, but it doesn't seem to have made him more popular.
Yeah, because the timing was quite impressive.
And in Israel, of course, there's a national consensus pretty much in support of war against Iran, because Iran is perceived, overwhelmingly as the biggest security threat to the country, and therefore, in an election year, you could well understand why it would be Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been unpopular, and particularly over the intelligence failures that led to the 7th of October attacks from Gaza into Israel by Hamas. This brushes that off the headlines as well, and may well give him a prospect of re-election this year.
But how about the situation in Iran itself? So apart from the question of regime stability and so on, how does the war now impact the people there? How strong do they feel the impact of this?
Well, I mean, people are terrified. I think that's the first thing. Secondly, the bombing seems to be fairly accurate and targeted, so that people can mostly feel they stay in their homes, that they're not going to get killed. But thirdly, there's a certain amount of rallying around the flag when the country is under attack. So it brings out a nationalist reflex, and the regime knows how to play on that as well. Downplays the Islamic side and plays up the Persian nationalism. But, people's lives are miserable. There are shortages of food and water in some places, and electricity is sporadic. There is little or no internet access most of the time, so they have difficulty in communicating, in finding out if members of the family are okay and safe and so on. There's been also damage to Iran's cultural heritage, particularly one palace which I know well in Isfahan seems to have been severely attacked or severely damaged in an attack on something else nearby. The Iranians, I'm not sure that I can tell how you can't take opinion polls in a situation like this, who they blame for this, whether they blame their own leaders who are unpopular. I mean, the Iranian regime before this war was supported by maybe 10% of the population, which is still 9 million people. And they're people who are part of the system, part of the patronage system, who work for the system, who are in the security service, the armed forces, and so on. But a lot of the country was clearly hostile to the regime and just wants to have a quiet life. They're sick of religion. They're sick of revolutionary propaganda. They just want to have a more normal life there, an educated, sophisticated society with a great culture. But I don't think that things are going to necessarily economically, things will get clearly worse for them for a sustained period, and politically, it's not clear that the outcome of this war will be better for the ordinary Iranian.
Yeah, and considering also the strike of the US on the school in Minab in Iran with over 170 little girls that were killed there, clearly this could alimenta a sentiment of nationalism.
Yeah, indeed. And the regime made the most of that. And, you didn't see many pictures of damage on military sites or regime sites, but boy, did you see pictures of that school and so on. It's a tragedy. It's a terrible thing. It was a mistake, clearly, by somebody in targeting.
And what I was reading is that it was a mistake which was also led by the fact that the US administration cut several stuff, among which also on defense. So is someone going to be blamed also from a legal perspective for this massacre, you think?
Well, the United States is not a party to the International Criminal Court. So I don't think that avenue will be pursued. And domestically, I don't know. I mean, is an accident a war crime in these circumstances? If the war itself is not prosecuted as being a war of aggression under international law, then a particular incident in the war, unless it's it's clearly a deliberate war crime, which I don't think this was, is unlikely to be prosecuted in my view.
If you now had to look at this conflict objectively and try to make an estimation, even though it's very difficult, how long this could take to finish this kind of intense conflict, what do you think? What are the factors that influence this?
Well, I think first of all, they start to run out of targets. At the moment, it seems what they're trying to do is to suppress the fires that are that are able to hit shipping along the Gulf Coast, and that will take some time. But I think that it will end when Trump thinks he's had enough, and the political calculation is that he's not doing, he's not benefiting anymore from it, and that could be quite soon. And I think the interest of the Europeans and their friends in the Gulf is in trying to make that sooner, and that may involve congratulating President Trump on his historic achievement in having removed the Iranian nuclear whatever threat for good, and once again there will be embarrassing flattery, no doubt. NATO Secretary General Rutte has already begun that. I saw a toe-curling interview that he gave with the BBC in which he was justifying everything that Trump was doing in Iran. But if it gets the war stopped and enables us to limit the economic damage to our societies and to the rest of the world, we're not the biggest victims of this. Then that might be a price worth paying.
And in more longer term perspective, we always like to make this question towards the end of the episode. Let's say the conflict ends now with the regime still in power, not the same leader anymore, but the regime in principle still in power. How should Europe then try to reconnect to this new regime? What kind of relations should we get into to avoid also similar situations unfolding in the future?
I think it would partly defend whether there was some agreement between the United States and the rump Iranian regime on the arms control issues, whether there are grounds for lifting the sanctions, the snapback sanctions, which would put into force. I don't think there's going to be a rush to Tehran to be the first to Tehran to sell them Mercedes or Peugeots or even Fiats. But the Europeans will want to sort of try and see how the Gulf region can be stabilized again. There has been talk occasionally in the past about some kind of regional security body along the lines of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Now, you could say, well, that's a pretty ineffective organization, and it may not be a great model, but some kind of security structure where Gulf countries could come and sit together and so on. Now, the difficulty will not be for the Europeans in talking to people there. It will be how quickly will the Qataris or the Emiratis or the Saudis be willing to sit, or the Kuwaitis be willing to sit at the same table as the Iranians and talk about regional security. I think that'll be a long time.
It has been a great episode. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
See you.